Okay. Matt Bracken, it's a pleasure to have you on my little channel. I've heard a lot about you, but the best is perhaps if you can present yourselves to my listeners.
I'm a pretty, I guess, unusual guy. I'm number 9 out of 10. So if my parents had a small family, there's no Matthew Bracken. And I have 8 sisters. Some are in heaven already. But I grew up with 7 older sisters, so it's an unusual household. 1 older brother and 7 older sisters. I think this helps me as a novelist because I grew up listening to women talking to each other as if I'm not there. And usually men do not have the benefit of hearing chat between women. When women are speaking to men, it's a different face they put on. So and that's my background. I went to Jesuit High School and University of Virginia in a reserve officer program where after college I would owe the United States Navy 4 years for the 4 years of university. And at the time, and still, I'm kind of a adventure junkie or a thrill junkie. Didn't want to be on a ship. My eyes weren't good enough to be a pilot, so I became a Navy SEAL back in that era, 1980. That era, I was in Beirut. That's the only close to war situation I was in. But this is before Somalia, before Desert One or Desert Storm, and then Iraq and everything else. But after my 4 years of the Navy, active duty, and some reserve time, I was pursuing my primary pursuit of my life, which is sailing boats on the ocean. So a lot of famous Europeans. It's more rare in this country than in Europe. A lot of guys have built steel boats and gone sailing. More Europeans. Bernard Matessier, of course, famously. Joshua the Long Way, is one of the heroes of all sailors of our generation. Certainly one of my heroes, Bernard Matessier. So I'm kind of that sort of a guy. Been writing novels for the last 10 or so years. And the novels are, of course, they're sold, but also they have the intention of being a warning device because I see very dangerous trends in our societies, very dangerous trends. And not only one, I look at them, most people, they look at one problem and they say, okay, let's focus on the economics. What happens if Deutsche Bank fails next week economically? But they don't say, well, what happens if the ATM machines all fail and people are rioting and fighting for bread? There are directions of these different waves that are going to impact together like tsunamis coming from different directions. When one hits, there's going to be a ripple effect. I think I agree with you. Ultimately, great danger is many scenarios lead to problems with our electrical grid. And if the electrical grid goes down, not only will it be a social catastrophe, maybe in history a bottleneck event.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people down here and not many going to be up there. But there might be some problems that would be very difficult in a post-technological world to deal with, such as, what happens with all of these nuclear plants. They can't self-tend forever. They can't, without an interconnected society, these plants will be able to produce power. They have machine shops. You pray that they can keep them running and shut them down safely, but I don't see how it can be done. If the grid goes down, eventually we're going to have a series of Chernobyls and Fukushimas, and the survivors of this possibly a bottleneck societal collapse will not only be dealing with, the anarchy, the lack of food, because our food is all derived today from petroleum, chemicals, pesticides. Without all of that, we don't have the capacity to feed even the survivors. But they'll also be living in a radiological wasteland with severe genetic defects, which will last for I don't know how long. But I mean, these are the situations people should seriously be thinking about today, because I think there's a very good chance that we're going to see them.
I obviously agree, and checking out your books, and I make you a promise that I will order them all and read them, so that next time we speak, we can discuss literature and the stories and the scenarios.
Yes,
However,
and also yours. But please, if anybody is paying attention, my short stories like Alas, Brave New Babylon, What I Saw at the Coup. I'm more interested that people should just Google my name and these short stories on the internet. and read them. If you want to buy my books, that's great. Sometimes I put them on Kindle for free, like every couple of months I do a free but the main thing is my short stories has my thinking that's more current about what we're about to approach, which is
now your website is enemies foreign
and domestic.
That
comes from our in our Constitution.
Yes.
And in the oath that American military officers and police officers, they swear, unlike say Germany in Second World War, they don't take a Führer oath or an oath to the Patria. In the United States, we take an oath to defend the Constitution, and not only against foreign enemies, but domestic enemies. If, for example, crypto-communist, Marxist, pro-Islamic traitor moles somehow came through the system and wound up in control.
That would never happen.
Eventually, that could never, that's like a novel, that could never happen.
Now, before we deal into that, and indeed on the very interesting text that you publish on your website, how did you start to figure out these trends that you describe, and how did it start? How did you figure out that the world is not just go to Walmart and consume and have fun? How did you get to that?
My first novel is I'm getting a little feedback. I don't know if you hear that. In my first novel, I was interested in showing that we should not take the national news at face value. That sometimes the politicians and the television networks can be knitted together like they are today, whitewashing the Muslim invasion of Europe. They can work together to provide like a false narrative, like in Sweden. We need Somalians to come and give us, more rounded culture. Think of the great food we're going to have with Pakistanis and Moroccans. In Sweden, we're too blonde. If the government and the media is selling a false narrative, it can be very powerful in brainwashing people. We laugh at North Korea. Oh, look at them. They're all in the stadium waving flags and crying about the dear leader. But look at Sweden. Have you ever seen a country that was actively trying to go extinct, like almost begging to be wiped out and genocided? Like, we're unworthy of just existing as Swedes. We've got to stamp it out. That's brainwashing. Mm-hmm. And there's a similar brainwashing I saw before 9/11. We had a sort of a pendulum swing after the Vietnam era. The Vietnam veterans came home. They were spat upon. They were called baby killers. They were not greeted like heroes coming home from France after World War II. Well, the pendulum swung very far around the time of Somalia, that every time the troops came home, it became a huge patriotic celebration, waving flags, welcome home. It was a reaction to how the Vietnam veterans were badly treated. The country went overboard in a patriotism way. And at the same time, I was observing our law enforcement with such an interchange in our country between people in the military reserves who serve active duty. They spend 6 months in Iraq. Then they go back and they're in a police department, in a SWAT team, in the special weapons commandos of the police. And it's just seeming like a merger now, where there's no longer a feeling of the military is for threats overseas, and we just have police. Sure, they have a revolver, but they wear a blue uniform and a cap, not a helmet, and a black uniform with a submachine gun. And our country was turning in this direction, and it still is turning in this direction. So my first novel is sort of a warning about how a false narrative can be presented and how people should look behind the false narrative for true stories, and also as a warning against the increasing militarization of the United States in response to some, organized crime, mafia, also terrorism. But it's just becoming too much like a Stasi state, with surveillance and armored cars for police, police in helmets. This is not an American way.
Yeah.
So I wrote a novel kind of showing the false mask and what's behind the false mask. But I've been interested beyond that in issues of social collision forces, which I see coming in the United States and in Europe, that if just a little bit of what we take for granted is taken away, we're going to have a social super disaster. Our cities today, half of the population of our cities are fed on a dole card, a electronic benefit transfer. They have a credit card where they go to the food store and buy food. Every 2 weeks at midnight, bam, a few $1,000s is on the card. And this is how they're earning their food, is by getting cash from the government and buying it in the supermarket. It's welfare, housing, it's all on one credit card. It's basically your salary to be supported by the government. If anything happens to our electrical grid, to the computer network, to any of these networks, because they're all tied together like the human skeleton system and nervous system and blood system, you can't have one of them crippled and the rest carries on. It's like saying, well, I only shot you in the spine, but your arms should be fine. But if you're shot in the spine, then the arms don't work. If we lose the computer network, our EBT, electronic money system, collapses, and these people won't be fed. The stores will be looted. In all cities will be Hurricane Katrina conditions, and our national emergency response can't possibly handle 50 Katrinas at the same time. This is something that I work into my novels so that people can understand. We need to be extremely careful if the right attacks are made. An enemy today doesn't need to drop a nuclear bomb from a missile from Iran or Korea. For one thing, they come with a return address so people will know who fired the missile and they'll be retaliated. But a computer hacking attack against the computer network or the electrical grid, we won't even know who to attack. We have many enemies that would like to do this to us. I feel that's our greatest threat right now. And it doesn't matter if it's an EMP bomb or computer hacking. If our computer network is crashed, if our banking system is crashed, or if our electrical system is crashed, any of those three, then the other two will also crash. Yeah. So the banking, the computer network, the electrical grid, all three must work. If any one of them is sabotaged, then all three will crash. And in the side of a week, we'll have riots and food looting.
From your knowledge, and unfortunately, I'm not a big conspiracy theories guy, but there are a lot of conspiracies around, or that we hear, information that we hear on the internet, and it's very hard to know what's true or what not. What's your opinion on any government plans to cope with such disaster if it happens?
Well, I often say, if there was such a plan, and I don't think that it's necessarily true that there is, George Soros meets with somebody and they say, this is what our plan is for next month. That's not necessarily happening. For there to be a confluence of motivations where like-minded people are feeling this is the time to strike because our position of power will grow lesser and we are in a better situation now if we cause this crash today than if we wait until, say, Donald Trump is elected. Oh my gosh, before that happens. I don't think it needs to be directed from a dark conspiracy boardroom. Now, that said, I take the study back as far as the Jacobins, and even before the Jacobins, some people came from Bavaria. I mean, it sounds now, and in my books I talk about this, the rubric or the imprint of conspiracy theory is used to downplay any real look into a possible true conspiracy. If the state-controlled media, state-influenced media, is all afraid to talk about black helicopters because immediately they'll be laughed at and ridiculed as a conspiracy theorist, well, then you really can have a black helicopter because no one will talk about it.
Yes.
So I think that on the left wing of the spectrum of the political spectrum, as you go towards the Marxists, the communists, Now, it's shown over and over in history, starting with the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, I don't know how you say it in French, but they said out of chaos, order.
Yes.
That was sort of a motto of the Jacobins.
Yes.
Well, first you have to create the chaos. You hate the society of the feudal society of nobility and big estates and clergy with also big estates. You hate that. But people don't just pick up pitchforks and go attack the Bastille. You know, they don't. It doesn't work that way. First, you have to create a food shortage, instigate political riots over the food shortage, and then you can have a revolution. The way that Lenin put it, supposedly, I never saw the quote, but it's attributed to Lenin, is when he is told that there is bread riots in, say, Leningrad, his attitude is the worse the better, because you have to create a fire in order to burn down the old structure, and then from the ruins of the old structure, you build an entirely new structure. You can't just march into the Duma in Moscow and announce that the Bolsheviks are taking over. You have to first create the chaotic situation, the riots, and everything else. Then eventually you march into the Duma and take over the Soviet Union.
You see,
I see that that's a possibility
today,
both in Europe today and in the United States. I think that the political conventions in America, which used to be just silly things where they already knew who was going to be the nominee of the Republicans or the Democrats, they would wave flags and wear silly hats. It's going to be very serious, potentially very serious at both conventions this year. And I think that they're going to have terrible riots because a convention is an easy target for the, what do you call it, the black gang, the anarchists that go to all the global conferences. It's a very easy target because you have all of these delegates who must get in and out of this place safely and have room for protests, but not have it turn into violent riots. I think that the evolution we're going to see between now and the conventions is there will be gunfire at some big political rallies or a bomb going off like Boston, something like that. So if you take a San Bernardino or a Boston and you put it at, say, the Cleveland Convention, then the convention will be held under threat of terrorism, for example. I can see a very extreme, depending on the timing of events, extreme like whiplash effects, like leverage of the political spirit. I mean, imagine like a Reichstag fire, but right before you're going to vote for Hitler. If you have a terror attack between now and the election, certainly it helps Trump. For example, Hillary Clinton could be indicted by the FBI. I mean, you could have a socialist Bernie Sanders against, I don't know who Trump really is, a political figure, but the election could be extremely crazy. And between now and next January, when the new president would come into power, for example, if it is Trump, I can see terrible riots across America involving burning, shooting, etc., possibly enough to cancel elections or to put in some sort of an emergency. And I caution everybody, always beware of the word emergency when it's spoken by the government.
Yes.
Because what the government often does, at least it does in the United States, they pass laws to deal with emergency situations, but some of the law is secret, okay? Only to be announced after the declared emergency. So when you have a severe enough emergency, you might not be able to hold elections in security in the United States. You have to stand in long lines at polling stations to vote. If there are even rumors that, for example, Ku Klux Klan, right-wing Nazis are shooting at black people waiting in line, and as a result of this fear, real or imagined, there is less turnout, or it's presented that there was less turnout, I think that it's very likely that the results of this election will be contested, and the losing party will reject the winning party's legitimacy. And if this happens, either party that feels delegitimized might feel that it's now time to take up guns and go a violent route. I think this is very dangerous from now until next January.
Now you have obviously a lot of friends and former comrades in the military, and we've seen since in the last since at least there was a reduction of the troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, there has been a lot of concern in the military in the United States and in other countries about not going into these difficult to define wars across the world. And there was, I certainly hear a lot of military personnel or former military personnel who think like you just described, who do feel that there's more enemies domestic than foreign. And what's your opinion on that? Do you think the military would follow orders, or
Yeah, the military will follow orders outside of the United States, almost any order. They're very brave.
yeah,
The Special Forces guys, the SEALs, all of these guys that are up in northern Iraq now,
yeah,
just behind the Iraqi Special Forces, I assume, somewhere up there. They're very brave. Even if it's crazy, they'll do it. But if they were, for example, in this country, ordered to disarm neighborhoods, that's more questionable.
mm-hmm.
But a more significant thing for, especially for Europeans to understand, well, maybe it's not so rare for Swiss, but in the United States, I think there are something like 100,000 federal law enforcement officers that carry guns. This is like FBI, DEA, all of these guys.
Yeah.
And against that, on the other balance, you have tens of millions of Americans who own deer rifles, which can, shoot a 200 or 100 kilo mammal from 500 meters.
Yeah.
Any mammal you choose.
Yeah.
And this is the most common rifle in America. And also they have the most popular rifle, single rifle now, is AR-15, which is a civilian semi-automatic version of M16, the most popular rifle in America. So, for example, if let's say Bernie Sanders winds up as president, but it's felt that it was in an illegitimate election, and then there's a attack on our power grid, where we have several tsunamis crossing, with riots that might threaten neighborhoods in the suburbs where people feel endangered because the stores are looted in the city. They come to the suburbs to loot the next store in line.
Yeah.
And the people there say, you can't come here and loot. It's going to be a lot of gunfire in any kind of a social breakdown situation in this country. I don't see it so much as, would the former military take up arms against the current military and police? So that could certainly happen, but it would be at the local level. It would just involve the sheriffs and the reserve military from this town. But certainly I do see, for example, if there is widespread looting in the midst of social breakdown, if there's widespread looting and the cities aren't fed, the first week all the stores are looted. The second week there's no food. They have to go out to the suburbs to get food. The people in the suburbs won't take it. And in this country, we have, a roughly identifiable minority groups. For example, you can tell from a binoculars distance, an African American from a Mexican, from a Swede, from Minnesota.
Sure.
And if the predominant type of a weapon in this type of social conflict will be a rifle with a scope on it, then you don't want to be fighting at a knife fighting range like in Europe. It would be knives and clubs. In that case, a gang of immigrants will always beat 2 or 3 Germans or French.
Yeah.
But if it's in the United States, it's more likely to take place at 100 meters or more range, because why am I going to let you get even close to my house if I can see with my own eyes that your skin is not the same color as mine? This is something that, for example, didn't happen in Bosnia, where a Serb, a Croat, and a Bosniak Muslim, they all look the same, they speak the same language. You could have like a identification document in each pocket for a pass, and as long as you can pretend. You speak, you can read the signs. You have to use subtle questions, to even figure out. But in the United States, black, white, Mexican, it can be seen at rifle distance. So any social conflict violence will present very differently in this country.
Mm-hmm.
In a European city, it will be mob violence, Molotov
Yes.
cocktail, club, sword, a few pistols. That means it's very close gang action. In that case, I don't like the Europeans' chances against, 20 or 30 migrants form up like a flash mob to strike a target of opportunity, attack, and then run away, scatter.
Exactly.
That's a bad formula.
How do you see that from the United States? Do the news or the media in the United States tell something special about the sudden change of the landscape in Europe in terms of immigration, for example?
Well, in the more controlled media, it's always very interesting. I don't spend much time on any internet sites that don't allow comment sections.
Mm-hmm.
I find the comments are often much more interesting than the story. And a lot of times in the more controlled media, it's presented as strictly a migrant problem. Oh, a tragedy happened and 400 poor migrants died in a boat. Let's do a better job of getting them to Italy tomorrow. But in the comments, it's exactly the opposite. And people are saying, why should Europe just allow itself to be invaded by 400 men at a time? It's crazy. Whoever said, sure, come in, when you have a track record of taking over with Sharia law everywhere that you go? It's insanity. Merkel is seen, I think, more as a fool or a traitor. Maybe she's also controlled. But it's mixed because in the conservative right-wing media, it's seen as madness. It's an invasion, politically correct, multicultural insanity. But in the mainstream left-wing media, it's seen as human rights. The Pope is washing the feet of a Muslim. Isn't that wonderful? The Pope is bringing Muslims to the Vatican. Isn't that wonderful? To the right wing, it's what's wrong with the Pope? Is he a secret Marxist? Is he, there's pictures of him with the hammer and sickle cross. There's questions about what happened to Pope Benedict. He didn't die. He wasn't sick with cancer. He just suddenly decided it was time for him to be pushed out.
Yeah.
He was pushed out.
Yeah. Interesting. And so the media portrays that in this way. And the people like you who have experience, I've had experience as well in like in Africa or Middle East, as you said in Beirut. You know how the world works. It is ethnically based, and conquering, and we both like history. When an army with people invade a territory, they don't, they do it in a hard way. It's not nice. I mean, only Europeans used to invade countries and try to build hospitals and roads and also exploit, of course. But here we have an invasion that I'm sure you'd agree that has incredible consequences, which lead to the collapse that we fear, is converging. And it's one of the additional problems.
And you get a dynamic which is very important for people to understand. It operates in many situations, not only with the Muslim migration invasion, but when a side that feels that its long-term trend is losing, that if we just let it continue, in 20 years, we're wiped out.
Yes.
Because these European women who are choosing not to have babies, it won't be their choice.
No.
They will be a sex slave. They will be just captured, and you're going to have 7 babies if you like it or you don't like it.
Including lesbian feminists.
We don't care.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. You're just here to make Muslim boys.
Yeah.
Period. And they could have blue eyes like you. We don't care. That's great. Like the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire.
True.
But when one side that is losing feels that the clock is against me, and it's better to have the big crisis now than the big crisis in 20 years when we have no chance, this puts a dynamic which increases the pressure of the wave to break sooner and not later.
Yes.
And sometimes you can even have both sides for different reasons, because the logic of each side can be very different. But the logic of the other side might also be that it's better to strike now. And I compare the situation now to 1914 in Europe, when the Archduke is shot, and you have alliances are engaged. Then you have a system of national conscription of mass armies, small standing armies, small permanent armies, with mass mobilization armies, where you shut down the factories and the farms. Everybody goes to the front. They put on their uniform. They get on a train. They load their artillery. They're all at the front. Then it becomes a Mexican standoff where neither side feels that it can back down without being attacked.
Yes.
But, and this is important, the finance minister is saying, do something because our economy is in collapse. We can't continue this. So that causes both sides to conflict. Well, a similar situation is happening now with 1 million, maybe 2 million new Muslim men arriving. They have no contacts, no family. They have no network other than in the refugee center. The controller, the bird dog, first spots the people and then gets them to a coach who assigns them to somebody. And before you know it, Muslims are very easy to brainwash into actions. Some of the attackers in Paris were only brought into the plan in the last 2 or 3 days. It's very easy to do a mind control on Muslims. It's very different from us. I'll give you an example. In a barracks situation in Switzerland, in the United States, you have a bunch of 20-year-old men. If one of us got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and turned on the lights and said, everybody get up, we're going to pray. We're 2 Hail Marys, our Father, everybody would throw a boot at him, right?
Yes.
And, it would be ridiculous.
Yes.
But in a Muslim situation, if 20 men, they don't know each other, maybe they go to the mosque, maybe never. But if 2 or 3 get up at 6 a.m. and they start praying, they will all pray, because none of the 17 will be the last one to say, I don't pray.
Of course.
They will one at a time get up. So if one guy says, tomorrow at dawn prayer, we're having dawn prayer, we're going to straighten these guys out, we're going to straighten these boys out. If he has 1 or 2 friends that say, I'm with you, at dawn prayer, still dark, they put the lights on, they face to Mecca, all 20 will be praying. It's a very different mind control apparatus than you and I have. Sure. And this means that when a tet breaks out in Europe, it doesn't need to be 80,000 Muslims all know, on this day on my calendar, we're all going to strike. It can only be 100 like that. But if they cause enough of a cascade effect where security services are running around shooting, then other Muslims will be very easily drawn in, even just to do minor operations like a stabbing, just to keep the fire going.
Yes.
It's a very different mindset and dynamic. In the TET article, I say there's no Obergruppenkommando, or what's the German term?
Yes.
OKW.
Yes.
It doesn't exist. But if they get 100 men to do this, there's a chance of a chain reaction. And before you know it, Europe is completely out of control. That it's interesting in Brussels, they went off of the condition 4 to condition 3 very fast, and people were saying, why did they drop it? Still, they have people they can't even find. They just went. It's because they are, in English vernacular, strapped.
Yes.
The security service is exhausted. They can't work 24 hours a day, week after week. This is how close Brussels is to snapping just from these attacks.
Which is very small.
What if you have 10 of those attacks every week?
Exactly.
There's no security service. The German army is a joke. They're unionized. If they want a NATO exercise, they say, we can't cross a river. We haven't had river crossing training. It's after 4 p.m. We can't work now. It's a joke. They're tiny and they won't fight. And they're going to go up against people like Paris, Mumbai, and Beslan constantly.
Yes.
This means the security forces won't be a definitive factor to save Europe. It will either be vigilante action by Europeans at a tribal level, or they're going to lose.
Now,
And
indeed,
to make it lose, they only need to lose the electrical grid. If the electrical grid goes down, lights out. It's
yeah,
over.
because Europeans always used technological advantage on uh, other tribes which might have even been numerically superior.
Right.
Now, indeed, if the economy, which is extremely complex, and you mentioned nuclear plants being extremely difficult to maintain, but I tell you what, to build a pen, you need a very complex economy these days as well.
Sure.
So if that collapses, indeed, we are back to, well, indeed, as you said, not ready for Switzerland. We were back to sticks and knives.
Yeah.
And
that's why I recommended this movie, The Last Valley, set during
yes,
the 30 Years War. It's war, tribal war fought at a molecular level, at a granular level. This
yes,
village, that village, total like Rwanda. Neighbors just going crazy against neighbors.
yes,
This can be like the landscape of Europe can be Rwanda at a tribal level.
yes,
With gangs of 30 men just running down a small group that they think they can catch and killing them with bars. This is very important for people to understand. We can't feed ourselves. That big pen is easy to make compared to delivering food to the market. And the food isn't grown in your neighborhood. I say to people in America, most of our cities have a ring city called a beltway.
yep,
I say, how much food do they grow inside the beltway? They don't.
zero.
It all has to come in. It's a very technological process, very complex orchestration of gears for the food to get to our supermarkets. If it's broken, if the machine is broken, it can go out of control and not be started again.
What's your
You can't
advice?
start the machine again.
I agree completely. What's your advice for citizens, for common people? What should they do?
Well, I don't think that there's any magic solution that's going to prevent a giant collision. It's sort of like saying if I'm a farmer in the middle of Czechoslovakia in May of 1914, what should I do? I don't know. Maybe go to America really fast because there's going to be a world war fought here. And nobody can predict what city will be Dresden and what city will be Prague.
Yes.
You know, if you knew, you'd say, go to Prague. Don't be in Dresden. Go to
But
Prague.
you cannot know.
You can't know. But when we see terrorism increasing and the targets are soft targets, so-called soft targets, where people are lined up queuing to get in the airport or the train station, you'll see an evolution when the target becomes infrastructure. We're so naive in our countries, in our modern Western countries. The electric companies and the internet companies put out helpful guides. You have a PDF on the computer. You can zoom down and see every trunk line of the optical fiber cables carrying all the internet because they don't want somebody to accidentally put an excavator,
Yes.
In through the optical cable. So they have them marked everywhere. Well, if your idea is to sabotage a country, you just need a shovel, and an axe.
Yeah.
And you can do more damage to Europe with guys out in fields. Nobody sees them following, a shovel and an axe. Small axe done all over the place. Death of 1,000 cuts will do more damage, I think, or severe damage. So it'll be very dangerous when you start seeing like the guys doing reconnaissance on a nuclear plant.
Yes.
Getting identification cards, things like that.
It's happening already.
Imagine if they sabotage a nuclear plant, get in the control room, sabotage the cooling water. You have Fukushima, Chernobyl. How many in France, upwind from Switzerland? I mean, imagine a Chernobyl in France coming.
Oh, yes.
The Alps won't stop that.
No, for sure. No, for sure.
It's just, to me, it's madness. It's insanity to bring in. I think that multiculturalism is a mental disorder. It's utopianism to the nth degree. It's utopianism.
At best.
If you believe in fairy tales, then everybody must believe in fairy tales. We all agree in this room we believe in fairy tales. The problem is the guy outside the room, he has a sword. He doesn't believe in fairy tales. He believes in cutting off your head. And to bring these guys in, I mean, nuclear plant, how many how many nuclear plants does France have? It's most of
60.
its power.
60.
And if one of them goes, then everybody downwind is in trouble.
Yep.
You can only run that type of a society if it's Frenchmen.
Yes.
They all speak French. They all are, think a similar way. Nobody would ever think to sabotage a nuclear plant. Well, they just invited in millions of people that would sabotage a nuclear plant.
Yeah, they have 300 extremists working in already. They found that they have 300 extremists working in nuclear plants in France already, which were in the list of the potential suspects for terrorism already. But they don't cross the databases between HR of the nuclear power plants and the intelligence services, because if you do that, it's an invasion of privacy. So now they had to, and they found out there's 300.
About 5 years ago, maybe, I'm not sure on the time, wasn't there a chemical plant in France that exploded?
Oh yes, actually more than one.
And it was supposed to, they said, it was an accident, but it was a guy named, the usual type of Mohammed person.
Just after September 11, I think it was 5 days after September 11, 2001, there has been in Toulouse a huge explosion and I know from probably same sources as you know, that indeed it was not exactly an accident. But officially it's an accident. Because you don't want to hurt their feelings, right? So yes, it can be pretty serious, I agree. But still, a lot of people cannot move to, and let me challenge you on this with this question. You say, well, in 1914 you should move to America, and that's very true. Should we move to America today, knowing that you also get 3 million illegal immigrants from Latin America, which are not the same as Muslim, I'll grant you that, every year. And also, as you mentioned, the cities, the urban areas in the United States, I mean, Atlanta, Los Angeles, these cities cannot survive if the grid goes down. What you like sailing, so you can move to other places, which is a good strategy.
I think mobility is a good strategy. I don't know if these headphones are good.
So
yeah, the strategy of sailing isn't just that you live on a sailboat. It's that you have maybe a chance to get to New Zealand or Argentina. My hope is that some places will be life rafts, that there are smart people in northern Norway or southern Argentina. They can run their own power plant. They can have a machine shop. They can build anything they need. Maybe not, Xbox or 50-inch plasma TV, but they can keep a modern society running, for sure. And having a mobility plan, if possible. I mean, not everybody can get a sailboat, that's for sure. But it's good to have a chance to get out. Problem is, you never know when it's time to get out.
Yes.
But I think that this is very important that people understand, unlike World War II, World War I and World War II, when America was a fallback and a pressure relief, the next battle is going to be the final one. I mean, look at all these factors. We have the Marxist Pope. Who would have dreamed, holding a hammer and sickle crucifix?
Yes.
These, if you are a religious person and you're fitting it into a biblical template, then you can say these are for sure signs of end times.
Yes.
The Jewish state is back.
Yes.
All of these things seem to be lining up. All these tsunamis coming in from many different directions to the same beach.
Yeah, I'm not into that, but I must say that it does look like that.
It does look like that, and I like the. I don't think you can say, for example, today, well, I have a sister in New Zealand, so I'm going to go to New Zealand, because number one, you don't know if the airplanes are going to be flying to New Zealand, because that's a very complex technological situation alone. If the grid goes down, I think we lose airports.
Yes, of course,
and lose the capacity to fly jets. But New Zealand, to me, I mean, it looks like a low-hanging apple for China. China would just send 20,000 people to New Zealand, then they own New Zealand.
Yes.
New Zealand doesn't even have a jet fighter. They got rid of them. New Zealand has like a Coast Guard with helicopters. That's it. And if the China says, you know what, we have a nice outpost there in that part of the South Pacific, We can just send 10,000 guys. We don't need them to come back. They just are there to colonize. They can take New Zealand. So I'm not sure even there's any place on the planet where you can just be sure if I got to New Zealand, then I'm going to live a good life and be safe. Because I think even a place like New Zealand, China would look at it on the map at that point when the U.S. Navy is not a factor and just say, it's time we go pick up New Zealand. We can use that as an outpost. Australia, I don't know. They've sure got their own migration situations, and I think the big battle has to be fought in America, in the United States. I think also in Europe, but the way that the Civil War is going to present in Europe is going to be almost like Rwanda.
I agree.
The security forces are exhausted after 1 week of Beslan attacks, completely exhausted, and then if German men are going to survive, they're going to have to fight back with whatever they have, and they're smart.
Yeah. They fight well usually, but
there's a real interesting experiment the Soviets did with foxes. It was a geneticist during the Lysenko era, so he had to be kind of clandestine, but he basically bred foxes by picking the most docile ones, and in just a dozen fast generations for foxes, they're like a little lapdog with floppy ears and fat and chubby and pretty and cute, and this DNA is the same.
Yes.
The genetic pressure is different, but the DNA is the same. And then they can run the experiment also in reverse, because obviously I'm referring to German men today. They took foxes and turned them into Pomeranians with brainwashing, but still the same Waffen SS is in the DNA.
Yeah.
It hasn't gone anywhere, and the question is,
because in the economy, they are still Germans. They're still great engineers. They're still incredible technicians. So I agree. The DNA is the same.
But the fighter part of it is suppressed. But
yes.
If they're not going to be just wiped out and their women taken from them and raped and enslaved, I mean, come on. These are the Germans we're talking about. I think at some point, then they get weapons from the military. They get weapons from the police. They will make a damn weapon in their own garage because they're Germans. You know what I mean? They're like the Czechs and the Swiss. If you give them a piece of steel, they're going to give you a gun.
Oh, yes.
Just come back next week.
We'll do that.
Right? You will.
Yeah, we have in Switzerland we are 8 million people now, and there's probably something like 16 million assault rifles going around, and that's just the long guns. It's not the handguns or revolvers or pistols. So we have a lot. In fact, I would say something is that the older generations in Europe, and with the exception perhaps of England, there's a lot of hunters. There's a lot of people with shotguns, with even pistols, and the young people have dropped that completely everywhere. And even in Switzerland, the new generations do not follow those steps. But again, we are not. I think you would agree. These tsunamis, they're not for 20 years from now. They are in the next years, if not months. It's something that's getting very near.
I think that the high danger point is predicated upon the United States election cycle right now.
Exactly.
Because we have things we have never seen before. An avowed socialist. I mean, he went for his honeymoon to Soviet Union in like 1968.
Yeah.
He went to like Cuba and Sandinista Nicaragua for his holidays. He's a hardcore Marxist, not a Democrat. He in his state in New England, he was a socialist, not Democrat. He's running as a Democrat. He's a cute pro-Castro, pro-Moscow Soviet socialist.
Interesting.
He might be running against this mystery man Trump, which he's a great capitalist, and I don't know if I trust him on anything. But it's sort of like, for the Republicans, they feel they've been lied to and betrayed every time they elect another Republican that says, we're going to close the Mexican border, we're going to throw out the illegal aliens. They never do it. And Trump sounds like he might actually do it.
The media,
maybe he's lying. But
the media seems to dislike him a lot, which is a good sign.
Yes, that's a good sign. But I don't want to, it's no point in turning this into American political show,
Sure.
but my larger point is we're going to see extreme swings that
Yes.
normally the United States election is very stable.
Yes.
I was a Russian studies major in university, and this Russian emigre professor who escaped from Soviet Union, Zelensky, I think. Anyway, he said, this is how Americans try to explain this is in the 1970s, I'm taking these classes. In the American system, we have a bowl, and the ball is in the bowl, and the bowl can turn this way, and the bowl can turn this way, and we can have wild politics, but we all know it's only going to be in here. And in Russia, because of their crazy and much more turbulent history with pogroms and Mongols and, Napoleon, just, Tsars followed, that they look at it like a dish, and the marble is here. And if this dish swings, it goes off, and then the civilization and rule of law, it's gone. So the Soviets felt like they have to keep their society locked in this position.
Yes.
Because if it turns a little too much, you don't know what happens. Well, this is the year when America's secure bowl, will Kerry win, or will Clinton win, or McCain. It's going to be like this, with the Sanders over here and Trump over here, maybe Hillary, but I think the odds are very good of a contested election, maybe no election, because, for example, in November, if there's some act of terrorism leads to power outages, even in a region of America, that region will say, wait, stop, we can't have an election. There's no electricity in Florida.
Yeah.
How can we have an election? And then if the national parties say, we're going to have it anyway, you'll do Florida later, we're going to see things where people will say, this is an invalid election. The results don't count. And I won't respect the law. I won't respect the president. I don't feel I must obey anybody now because our social contract is torn up, and now is the time we're going to settle the issue violently.
Could be.
I'm not saying me. I'm just saying there are
No,
people
of
outside.
Of course.
Left and right.
Of course. No, very, very possible. And then it's an open game for the future. There's nothing is in the balance. This is why I don't know what's your opinion. Do you think the people who are really in power, the people who pull the strings of elections, let's call it the establishment, do you think these guys have any clue of how potentially far we can fall if things go bad?
No, absolutely not. And this is how I went in my decades ago. I went to some political demonstrations where I was in groups of thousands of people, and across the boulevard is groups of thousands of people. They're waving hammer and sickle flags and Workers of the World Party flags. And on our side of the street, we're waving American flags and Don't Tread on Me with the snake flags. And there's a lot of anger, but I can tell you, and you can go incognito into the other side. Just take off and walk through the other side. And I can tell you that when you're surrounded by a mob, it feels like the whole world. When you're in the middle of 10,000 people that all are excited, they all agree with you, they all love you, you love them, you feel like you're unstoppable. You can march on the White House and go straight over it.
Yeah.
Well, the establishment, when they meet at the country club, they feel like that because everybody that they talk to affirms their feelings that, we have to stay in control because if the common people have populism and can just elect anybody they want, it will get out of control. I think that they believe that they're keeping control for our own good.
Yeah.
But they don't think that they understand that this year that isn't going to work. It's the old analogy of when the plane is in the dive, when the plane is stalling, you don't pull up. You have to push the nose down, counterintuitive.
Yes.
You have to do something against your instinct to get airplane speed so then you get lift and control again. Well, the establishment I don't think they understand. They're doing the same. They're pulling up, pull up, and the plane is just staying in the stall, and eventually it must crash. So, yeah, I think that this is the year when the establishment, everybody is going to make wrong decisions.
Yeah.
It's like the Archduke. If everybody at Versailles after World War I could meet in that train in 1912,
Yes.
they all see that 10 years
ago,
they would say, whoa, don't make this mistake. But right now, the forces are coming together for collisions. And I think it's very bad between now and January. If the United States gets through January with a new president who is accepted, even if there's half the country is against them, like I'm against Obama or they were against Bush, I'll think it's a miracle and a blessing if next February we're having this conversation talking about, what do you think about Donald Trump's new plan? I think we're going to be in new territory by January, talking about emergency law, power restrictions, sabotage of the internet, censorship of the internet. I think we're going to be in a whole new realm by January.
Oh, yes, very possible.
And I'm not somebody who always said this. I didn't say it at Y2K. The computers were all...
Sure.
I mean, I'm not somebody who's a chronic, I've never said I'm very worried about this year, but I'm very worried about this year.
Okay. No, I agree. Now, my books deal a lot about preparation. How do we prepare to survive economic collapse, a grid collapse? How do you survive in the city? And the answer is don't live in the city. My next book is going to be how do we prepare for a potential meltdown of the nuclear plants and biological or possible biological problems such as the flu coming back like in 1919.
Yes, absolutely.
In the United States, there has been for many years this survivalist movement, and more recently they call it the prepper movement, and which it's a big overlap with libertarians, but also with a lot of former military and indeed people who are considering themselves constitutionalists and patriots.
You're exactly right.
What do you think people should do to prepare themselves this year?
I think that everybody needs to think first always about water. Just because your beautiful high-rise in downtown that's so convenient to your work and the cultural amusements and the great restaurants, just because for your whole life water has gone up those pipes and come out of a spigot, it's a miracle that it does. Every day that it works, it requires filters to be changed and generators to be checked in case the power has a shortage. If you're living in any place where water comes from a city supply, not a well, you have to do your research and think, how long does it last if the power goes out? I'm not talking about like a little hurricane in one city. I mean a whole region of a country, or in Europe, a whole country.
Yeah.
If the power goes out, what happens? Where do you get your water? If the answer is, in a few days, my tap is dry, and maybe it never comes on again,
yes,
then at the first thing you have to do, wherever you live, is start getting,
yes,
plastic ones like this or similar.
Yes.
Something you can carry in your apartment. Nobody notices. Nobody cares. Nobody sees it. But
things like that.
Yeah, one at a time. You bring them home and fill them up and stack them against a wall or something, because the most dangerous time in a lot of scenarios, I'm not saying this will save you for sure, but the most dangerous time, maybe the power is out only for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But if you have to leave your apartment because you're out of water in 3 days, this is the most dangerous time when anarchy is on the streets.
Yes.
And if you can stay in your apartment, you have your own camping food and your own water supply, it might be best if you can stay where you live for, say, 2 weeks, a month at least, because such mayhem can be on the street. You don't want to have the father, who is the protector of the wife and the children, to go out to just get water, and he's killed. Now who takes care of the wife and the children?
Yes.
Somebody from another country, probably, and in not a good way. So just to be able to stay in where you live, if you live in the country, put in a well if it's possible. Even a shallow well, not the best water, is even not good water is way better than no water.
Agreed.
So it has to start with water. If you can get accumulate enough camping food and canned food for a month, I think this is a minimum. Anybody can, and it's not expensive now. In every time this type of disaster happens, people afterwards say, I should have had more food, I should have had more water.
Yes.
It was so stupid.
Yes.
We assume the supermarket is always open, and we might not find it open.
Or always full.
There's no food, or it's too dangerous to go there. It's like a sure chance to be robbed or something.
Agreed. No, for sure.
I hate this chair. A little
same for me. No, for sure. So
down over here.
Now, what you will find, however, interesting, and maybe we'll leave it here and we'll do it again in a few weeks or a few months.
Sure.
Is that what you'll find interesting in my book? The English version is here. Survive the economic collapse. Is that I try to think of ways of how you survive beyond those 2 weeks. How do you survive beyond 2 years, 20 years? In the sense that I agree that we are at the verge of something completely new. If something's bad happen, and I believe that the chances are are growing very rapidly that something will happen very soon. And like you, I didn't think that for year 2K. I didn't think that before. However, there's a chance that the world changes completely. As you said before, this bottleneck happened. Just as when the Roman Empire collapsed, I don't know, population of Rome went from 1.5 million to 30,000. And yesterday I was in Italy near the city of Aquileia, and the Huns destroyed and razed that city to the ground in the 4th century. Now, when things like that happen, the survivors of that city moved into the Laguna and founded Venice, which is not too far from. You've probably been to Aviano Air Base, I'm sure, and so they built a new civilization, but they had to endure 2 or 3 centuries of a very different life from the life of very very sophisticated empire.
There's some good lessons from American Indians of the Southwest, the Navajo,
yes,
and other of the Mesa dwelling Indians. They had lived for many centuries in multi-story towns,
yes,
pueblos,
yes,
3-4 story buildings holding thousands of people. The construction required a lot of timber, mud bricks and timber, and eventually they deforest so far that it becomes uneconomic to walk for a week to get a log to come back. And then the pressure of a drought on top of that caused the cities to break apart. The cities couldn't exist. The survivors had to go to the countryside, and with a big population decrease, of course. But in this interim, and it's very interesting, so you go from a high civilization with thousands of people in the Mesa mud and timber construction towns, eventually to Apache bands, hunter-gatherers like Apaches, small, living in completely nomadic with tents. But in the middle, for the century or two after the collapse of the cities, we had a phenomenon of the cliff dwellings, where
yes,
the same type of construction is built into natural slots on cliffs, like in the Grand Canyon. So you can have a few hundred people living in a place which is very defensible.
yes,
Where the enemy can't possibly follow you up or come down. You can come down when it suits you, but you can withdraw and hide and withstand a good siege. And similar things happened with Greek monks,
yes,
in mountain abbeys, situations like this. So this is why, in fact, the novel series I'm writing now, it's after the collapse, but with a sailboat, and the guy is trying to go between these surviving outposts, where, like the cliff dwellings, you do have some functioning towns. It doesn't take thousands and thousands of people to have a functioning town.
yes, true.
A machinist can rebuild electric motors, things like that. It's not too exotic. We're talking early 20th century technology.
Yes.
is sustainable.
Yeah.
And if the society doesn't kill itself, if you have a lot of smart people who can defer their gratification and be aware of various social concepts where you don't just shoot your neighbor because you're angry at him, which is coming to Europe, then if you have a place with a homogeneous population, more or less, I find the group of sailors, the nomads of the ocean, the sailors, they usually can do basic repairs on engines, and
yes.
They're very self-reliant people. So when they go to places, they're often welcome because they bring a skill. They're not just a welfare parasite showing up. You have doctors and pilots and engineers who are out on sailboats. So they bring something to the table. And I think that these outposts, I hope, will survive. I don't know about in the middle of Europe. It could be really ugly.
We have big fortresses in the Alps. That's for sure.
In Switzerland, yes, but you have to hope that the French control those nuclear plants.
Yeah, that's going to be not certain.
That's a huge. I mean, and the same I can say here. It's not like I have plants upwind for me.
Yeah, we all.
And downwind, and they're same. Maybe not as bad as in France.
We hope that the Russians send their paratroopers with some engineers, and they drop them on every power plant to shut them down properly. But that's the only thing I can hope for, because I'm not going to go and shut them down. I don't know how to do it, and they're going to burn if they're not shut down properly. So, and
not to mention that they could be sabotaged.
Oh yeah.
Because the guy who is the most effective saboteur doesn't belong on any terrorist list.
Of course,
it's completely inside of his heart. Like the Egypt air pilot who sabotaged an airplane, he was not even the crew. He was just flying on the airplane, and he asked if he could sit in the seat while the pilot was taking a rest. He was just going back to Egypt, and then that's when you discover he's a fanatic.
Yeah.
So the engineer in the power plant, you could think, well, I've been drinking beer with him. His wife doesn't.
Yeah.
In their mentality, they can be overcoming the sin of having an uncovered wife and drinking beer with infidels. They can wipe all the sin out with one good jihad. That's
what deep cover is. It's going far into the. No, I agree. There are risks. There's these big risks.
It's a very dangerous social dynamic for the Muslims, though, because they have a parachute that they can feel in their heart they're doomed to go to hell. And there's no way he can do enough good deeds, paying the taxes and the tithing, and there's no way he can overcome his having a wife and daughters that are going to American high schools and drinking beer, hanging out with infidels. There's no way he can, in his religion, the only way he can get to heaven when he begins to worry about this is the big act of jihad.
Yeah.
So it makes even a guy who drinks beer and has a wife with no veil, you can't know what's in his head.
Yeah, it's very convenient.
Very convenient.
Yes.
Very dangerous.
Well, look, let's do this. Let's talk in maybe a month or so. I will read more of your books. Remind us. So your website is enemiesforeignanddomestic.com. .com.
Yeah.
They can Google that. They can Google your name. I encourage our listeners to go and check it out. I've read fantastic article on putting into parallel the Tet Offensive of '68 in Vietnam and the potential strike that we in Europe are going to face very quickly. There's 2 more million arriving this spring, and they will come in because they will let them in. Actually, they will bring them in. And so if we're still around in 2 months, oh yes, remember Stalin used to say, the Pope, how many divisions? Well, he's bringing 2 million people in. That's almost 200 divisions.
But this is when I speak of tsunamis coming from different directions, big ones, small ones, fast ones, slow ones, but they're all coming to the same beach. Even in the religious sphere, for those Catholics who do think we must respect the Pope, and if the Pope says refugees are good, then my church will sponsor refugees. So even the Pope is part of one of the tsunamis
Oh.
Even the Catholic Church now, I think, is subverted completely, and
Yes,
is part of the problem.
and many Catholics who are not suicidal, they are starting to think about this, saying, well, hold on a second. We have been taught that the Pope is the voice, is the Bishop of God. He's infallible. If he does something, it's because it's the right thing. And obviously it's not the right thing. So
right.
They are completely switching. So he's going to lose hundreds of millions of people to something else.
I think it's one of these signs. It's like when we don't read about these things in isolation, don't think that the Pope has nothing to do with Deutsche Bank. I'm not saying that he's on the board of Deutsche Bank. What I mean is an economic collapse, the migration invasion, an ecological holocaust from a meltdown. These can't all be just seen in isolation.
No, I agree.
We don't need to worry about the power plants because we have really great engineers and many protocols, and if there's any problem. But what if the whole power grid goes out in France during a civil war?
Oh, it will. It will go down. There's no way. The way the grid is built is not supposed to have so many fail-safes. A little bit, but not massively. So, same for Switzerland, same from Germany, same from Canada and United States. You blow up some transforming stations, and the thing falls down like a domino, like a house of cards. It's not supposed to withstand such things. It was never built this way. And of course, there are parallel lines, like in the US. You have the military have their own networks because of the time of the Cold War. Obviously, there was this risk of. So here too, the military in Switzerland, the military have their own parallel system, which is hidden underground. It's completely different. But that's not to make the cities survive. It's just for the military. Right. So it's not going to be enough for.
It's an important concept I try to get through to people, because obviously we're rightly concerned if North Korea is acting crazy with missiles and nuclear bombs, and Iran is. But you don't need to drop a nuclear bomb over an American or an European city to wipe it out. You just cut off its electricity.
Oh yes, and it will wipe it out on its own.
We have evolved a society that lives like a moon base under a glass bubble, and it's pressurized oxygen inside, and we think it's the whole world, but we've evolved into a moon base where if something cracks the glass, we lose our oxygen.
Yeah,
and
it's a good analogy.
Is electricity.
It's a good analogy.
But banking, the banking system, the electrical grid, and the computer network system, mostly Cisco stuff, if any one of these three systems fails, they all fail, and there's a collapse.
Yeah, and there's no redundancy.
No, so when you hear about a banking collapse, like, oh well, they'll just go to zero interest, then they'll go to negative zero interest. We're coming to the end of the Keynesian cycle.
Yes.
Von Mises is going to be proven to be right.
Of course.
In the long run, we're all dead, Keynes said. Well, he's dead, but we have to suffer the collapse.
Yes.
When he says in the long run we're all dead, he means it won't be our problem.
Exactly.
We'll keep doing this fractional reserve currency system until it collapses, but that'll be a long time. Now is the long time.
That's what happened with socialism. He was a socialist.
Right.
So, yeah, of course.
As long as it doesn't happen on me, and he didn't have children.
He didn't have children, not that I know of. Not that I think he could.
That kind.
No, he was not able to get them. But anyway, look, I think it's very interesting. We'll talk some more, and maybe next time I'll read more of your documents, and we'll be able to comment a little bit. I'll be very happy to have your feedback on my own writings and tell me if my strategies make sense or not.
I might have some questions for you because the book I'm writing now is half is set in Morocco.
I know Morocco.
Multilingual country, and Moroccans often speak French, of course.
Yes.
But because of tourism, they also speak English, German, whatever, because it's tourism culture. But I might have some French terminology questions for you.
I'll be happy to hear in any ways. I'm well traveled in those countries.
Yeah, it's always a bad mistake for an author in fiction if they use outdated slang.
Yes.
If I read slang, but every Frenchman says nobody has said that in 40 years.
That's what happened to Dan Brown in his books. He was he has sold billions of books, and they're all full of mistakes. It's quite funny. So
Yeah,
anyway,
no research. No research.
no research at all.
And no readers. No readers. Give it to a guy in Italy. He'll tell you.
Exactly. Matt, thank you very much, and we'll speak again. And I'll put you in touch with one or two guys I know in Florida. I think you'll have good things to talk about. Excellent.
Great meeting you.
Take care.
Someday
Ciao.
I'm going to get to switch